Julian Hayes snuck his eighth glance at the woman on the other side of the sofa. She was engrossed in an issue of Forbes, her profile illuminated by the soft glow of the floor lamp. The image was disarmingly serene, almost deceptive. If Julian didn't know better, he'd never guessed that the woman, Sienna Miller, was the person he'd signed a contract with an hour ago to be his wife. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from his best friend, Leo. "So, did you meet your wife yet?" Julian quickly typed back, "Yeah. She's in my living room, reading a magazine, making herself right at home." "Damn, where'd you find someone that professional?" "This high-end agency recommended her. Said she was the best actor on their roster." After sending the text, Julian cleared his throat. Sienna looked up, her gaze calm and direct. "Is there something you need me to do?" she asked. Julian was momentarily speechless. The whole situation was surreal. A complete stranger was sitting in his apartment, asking what he needed from her, just an hour after they'd signed a $100,000 contract stipulating she would play his wife for the next 6 months. Yeah, about the family dinner tomorrow night. Are you ready for that?" Julian scratched the back of his neck. "My parents, my sister, and my aunt and uncle's family will all be there." Sienna closed the magazine and offered a small, confident smile. "Don't worry, I've studied the portfolio you provided. Your father is a retired history professor who collects stamps. Your mother is an avid gardener, particularly fond of roses. Your sister is a pediatrician with 2 kids, a 6-year-old daughter who loves Frozen and a 3-year-old son who's obsessed with dinosaurs." Julian blinked. "You have a great memory." "It's part of the job." Sienna stood and walked over to him. "But for this to be convincing, we need to practice." "Practice what?" "Intimacy," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Right now, we look more like a landlord and a tenant than a newly married couple." Julian instinctively took a half step back. "How do we practice?" Sienna held out her hand. "Let's start with holding hands." He hesitated for a second before placing his hand in hers. Her fingers were cool and slender, and they closed gently around his palm. "Too stiff," she critiqued. "Have you ever held a girl's hand before?" "Of course I have." Julian felt a flash of indignation. "Then relax." Sienna adjusted the angle of their intertwined fingers. "A new husband wouldn't hold his wife's hand like this. It's more like a doctor checking a patient's pulse." Julian tried to loosen his grip. To be honest, Sienna was beautiful. Not in an aggressive, in-your-face way, but with a quiet elegance that grew on you. If he'd met her under any other circumstances, he might have genuinely been interested. "Better," she nodded. "Now look at me." Julian did as he was told. Her eyes were a light hazel, remarkably clear under the lamplight. "Call me Sienna," she said. Sienna." Julian felt his tongue trip over the syllables. She frowned slightly. "Too formal. Try to say it with some warmth. After all, we're in love and have been married for 2 months." Julian took a deep breath and tried again. "Sienna." That was better. Sienna nodded, satisfied. "Use that tone tomorrow. Now, tell me the story you gave your family about how we met." "I said we met at a friend gallery opening. You're a freelance illustrator." "Good. That's close enough to my actual background that it won't fall apart under questioning." She released his hand. "You have my portfolio, right? Did you look at it?" "A little," Julian admitted honestly. "Your work is really good." "Thank you. I'll drop a few artistic terms tomorrow to add to the authenticity." Sienna glanced at her watch. "I should get going. I'll be back tomorrow at 5 with my suitcase. I'll pretend I'm just moving in from my old apartment." Julian walked her to the door. "Hey, thanks for being willing to do this." Sienna turned to him, a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. "Honestly, I've taken on a lot of assignments like this, but they're usually to fend off parents who are desperate for their kids to get married. You seem like a great catch. Why do you need to hire a fake wife?" Julian gave a wry smile. "It's a long story. Then save it for later." She didn't press him. "See you tomorrow, Julian." The way she said his name was so natural, as if she'd said it 1,000 times before. Julian stood frozen in the doorway until the elevator doors closed behind her. Back in the empty living room, Julian let out a long sigh. This was all for the old brownstone, the one his grandfathers will stipulated could only be inherited by a grandchild who was married. The deadline was 6 months away. He'd been staunchly against the archaic clause, but he couldn't stand the thought of his cousin, Caleb, getting his hands on it. Caleb had already been talking about tearing down the historic building to put up luxury condos. Julian wouldn't let that happen. That house held too many of his childhood memories. His phone rang again. This time it was his sister, Chloe. "Jules, make sure you and Sienna get here a little early tomorrow. Mom's making her famous pot roast and wants to get everything perfect." "Got it, Chloe. We'll be on time." "It's just, you getting married was so sudden. You never even mentioned you had a girlfriend." Julian forced a laugh. "Well, when you meet the right person, you just know." "All right, well, prepare for a full interrogation tomorrow," Chloe said, laughing as she hung up. Julian put his phone down and rubbed his temples. His performance had to be flawless. The next day, at 5 o'clock sharp, Sienna arrived at Julian's door, pulling a suitcase behind her. She'd changed into a casual outfit, her hair tied back loosely, making her look even more approachable than the day before. "Ready to go?" she asked, her tone as breezy as a real newlywed on her way to meet the in-laws. Julian nodded, taking her suitcase. "A little nervous." "That's normal. Just follow my lead." Sienna pulled a small box from her purse. "A gift for your mother. Handmade, rose-scented candles. And for your father, a set of limited edition stamps I had a contact track down." Julian stared at her, amazed. "You're incredibly thorough." "The devil is in the details," she said with a smile. "Now let's do one last run-through. Your birthday?" "March 18th. My favorite color?" "Blue." "Right. Sky blue. Don't forget." She quizzed him again. "What am I allergic to?" "Shellfish." "Correct. Looks like you did your homework." Sienna nodded, satisfied. "Let's go." On the way to his parents' house, Julian couldn't help but ask, "How long have you been doing this?" "A little over 2 years." "How do you even get into this line of work?" Sienna looked out the window at the passing city streets. "It was a fluke. I helped out a friend, discovered I had a knack for it, and just kept going." "Doesn't it feel weird? Pretending to be someone's wife or girlfriend?" "It did at first. Now I'm used to it." She turned back to him. "Everyone has their own way of getting by. This is mine." Julian wanted to ask more, but they had already pulled up to his parents' building. Sienna took a deep breath, then naturally linked her arm through his. "Remember, we're deeply in love." Julian nodded and led her inside. Chloe opened the door, 2 curious little faces peeking out from behind her legs. "Uncle Julian!" 6-year-old Mia launched herself at him, but her eyes were fixed on Sienna. "Is this my new aunt?" Sienna knelt to Mia's level. "You must be Mia. Your uncle told me you're the sweetest princess in the whole family." She produced a beautifully decorated pencil case from her bag. "This is for you. I drew Elsa on it myself." Mia's eyes went wide as she took the case, immediately captivated by the hand-drawn Snow Queen. "Wow, it's so pretty." Sienna then turned to 3-year-old Noah. "And you must be the dinosaur expert, Noah." She magically produced a small dinosaur figure. "This is a Triceratops. Your uncle said it's your favorite." Noah hugged the toy tightly and mumbled, "Thank you, Aunt Sienna." Watching the scene unfold, Julian was in awe of Sienna's skill. In less than a minute, she had completely won over the 2 toughest critics in the family. Chloe grinned and patted her brother on the shoulder. "Wow, you picked a good one." In the living room, Julian's parents were waiting. He could feel his mother's scrutinizing gaze sweeping over Sienna. "It's so nice to meet you both." "I'm Sienna," she said warmly, handing them the gifts. "I heard you love roses, Mrs. Hayes, so I made these candles for you. And Mr. Hayes, this is a set of the 1980 commemorative space exploration stamps. I hope you like them." His mother's expression softened slightly as she accepted the gift. "Oh, you shouldn't have. Just having you here is enough." His father, however, was already eagerly opening the stamp album, his eyes lighting up. "Well, look at this. These are hard to come by these days." Sienna smiled. "A friend of mine runs an antique shop and happened to have a set. I asked him to hold it for me." Dinner was a masterclass in performance. Sienna passed Julian dishes at just the right moments, shared knowing glances with him across the table, and answered questions with a perfect blend of warmth and privacy. "So, Sienna, you're an illustrator?" his mother asked. "Yes, primarily for children's books and magazines." "Is the income steady with that kind of work?" Julian couldn't help but jump in. "Mom, is this an interrogation?" "It's okay," Sienna said, placing a gentle hand on his arm. She smiled at his mother. "Freelance work can be unpredictable, but I've built up a base of regular clients over the years, so it's fairly stable." Besides, Julian's game development studio is doing very well, so we're not under any financial pressure. His mother nodded. So, when are you two planning on having children? Julian nearly choked on his soup. But Sienna, without missing a beat, smiled. We wanted to enjoy some time, just the two of us, since we're so newly married. But we've talked about it. Maybe next year. Julian looked at her, marveling. The woman could lie without even blinking. After dinner, Sienna insisted on helping with the dishes and struck up a conversation with Chloe about parenting tips, seeming to find an instant rapport. Watching her move so easily among his family, laughing and talking, Julian was struck by a strange feeling, as if she truly belonged there. On the drive back to his apartment, Julian let out a huge sigh of relief. Thank you so much for today. I think my parents loved you. Of course they did, Sienna said with a confident smile. Judging by their reactions, I'd say we passed the first test. You're incredible at this, Julian said, genuinely impressed. I was almost starting to believe it myself. Sienna's smile faded slightly. Remember, Julian, it's just an act. He paused. Of course. The car fell into a brief, awkward silence. I have to be at the studio tomorrow, so you can just make yourself at home, Julian said. The guest room is all set up for you. Everything is brand new. Sienna nodded. I have a meeting with an editor tomorrow about a new project. I might be back late. Back. Julian repeated the word. It sounded strange. Back to your apartment, she corrected. For convenience, I'll be staying there for the duration of the contract. It's in the agreement. Julian remembered the clause. For the next 6 months, he would be living with a complete stranger. As he pulled into the garage, he couldn't stop himself from asking, doing all these assignments. Don't you ever get lonely? Sienna's hand paused on her seatbelt buckle. Why do you ask? It just seems. You're always playing the part of someone's partner, but none of it is real. She turned to him, her expression unreadable in the dim light. Mr. Hayes, our contract doesn't include therapy services. Julian held up his hands in surrender. Sorry, cross a line. They rode the elevator up in a slightly tense silence. At his apartment door, Sienna spoke suddenly. I know this is just a transaction. You don't need to worry about how I feel. Julian wanted to say something, but he just nodded. That night, lying in their separate rooms, neither Julian nor Sienna found it easy to sleep. For both of them, it was going to be a very long night. Julian picked up his phone and saw a new text from his sister. Sienna is amazing. Mom is totally sold. Congrats on finding the one, little bro. He gave a bitter smile and replied with a smiley face emoji. In the next room, Sienna opened a small notebook and wrote, Day 1. Family meeting successful. Note, subject is emotionally expressive. Risk of unnecessary attachment. She closed the book and turned off the lamp. In the darkness, she whispered to herself, It's just a job, Sienna. Don't mess it up. #, chapter 2. The act begins at 7 in the morning. Julian was woken by sound from the kitchen. He stumbled out of his bedroom to find Sienna at the stove, an apron tied neatly around her waist. Morning, she said without turning around. I made breakfast. Scrambled eggs and oatmeal. Is that okay? Julian rubbed his eyes. You cook. Basic life skill. Sienna slid the eggs onto a plate. The contract states we share household duties during the cohabitation period. Julian sat at the dining table, looking at the neatly set place setting and the warm food. It felt unreal. Since he'd started living alone, his breakfast had consisted of coffee and maybe a granola bar. It had been years since someone had made him a real meal at home. Heading to the studio today, Sienna asked, sitting across from him and taking a small spoonful of oatmeal. Julian nodded. The beta test for the new game is next month. We're in crunch mode. What kind of game is it? A puzzle adventure with some mystery elements. Julian looked at her, surprised. Are you interested in games? Illustration and concept art have a lot in common, she said. Besides, understanding my husband's job helps me play the part better. Julian couldn't help but laugh. You're a true professional. Of course. You get what you pay for. Sienna stood and cleared their plates. My meeting with the editor is at 10. I'm heading out. The door clicked shut, and the apartment was quiet again. Julian looked at the empty seat across from him and suddenly felt that the space, usually just quiet, now felt profoundly empty. At the studio, Leo cornered Julian the moment he walked in. So, how'd it go? Did the family dinner blow up in your face? Julian dropped his backpack. It went perfectly. My parents are completely in love with her. No way. Leo raised an eyebrow. Who is this woman? Professional actor from an agency, Julian said in a low voice. Honestly, she's so good it's a little terrifying. Leo burst out laughing. You're paying for a wife, man. You weren't expecting her to actually fall for you, were you? Julian shot him a look. Shut up. Any feedback from the QA team? Was just about to tell you. Leo's expression turned serious. There's a bug in the level 3 maze. Players are glitching through the walls and getting stuck. Julian spent the entire morning debugging code. During his lunch break, he got a text from Sienna. Do I need to make dinner tonight? He replied, no, probably working late. You're on your own. A moment later, she texted back. Okay, make sure you eat something. Julian looked at the simple, considerate message and found it absurdly funny. This was the strange reality of a contract marriage, receiving routine expressions of care that you knew were completely fake. At 8 that night, Julian dragged his exhausted body home. The moment he opened the door, he stopped short. Takeout containers were arranged on the coffee table, and Sienna was sitting on the floor, a drawing tablet and a laptop spread out in front of her. You're back, she said, glancing up. I order Vietnamese. There's some left if you want it. Julian dropped his bag. You've been working this whole time? Yeah, new picture book. The deadline's tight. She stretched her neck. Just heat it up in the microwave. Julian warmed up the food and sat across from her. Sienna's eyes never left her tablet, her stylus moving rapidly across the surface. How was your meeting with the editor? Julian asked. Good. We finalized a new series. 24 books. 24? How long is that going to take? About 2 years. She finally stopped drawing and looked up at him. It's a long-term project, a steady source of income. Julian nodded and kept eating. After a moment, he couldn't resist asking, is the pay? I mean, for this line of work, playing someone's partner. Is it good? Sienna raised an eyebrow. Thinking of a career change? Just curious. It varies. She saved her file and closed her laptop. Long-term contracts like yours are rare. Most are one-offs, meeting the parents, fending off an ex-boyfriend, that sort of thing. Julian grew thoughtful. Have you ever been in a real relationship? Sienna's expression chilled. Mr. Hayes, that is outside the scope of our contractual discussions. Sorry, crossed the line again, Julian said, holding up his hands. Just making conversation. Sienna stood and gathered her art supplies. I'm going to my room to work. Watching her leave, Julian sighed. The woman was like a porcupine, retracting her quills the moment anything personal came up. Over the next 2 weeks, they settled into a strange rhythm of cohabitation. Sienna would make breakfast in the morning, and whoever got home first would order dinner. They'd exchange a few words about work at the table, then retreat to their separate rooms. On weekends, she would accompany him to family gatherings, flawlessly playing the role of the devoted newlywed wife. Everything was going so smoothly that Julian almost forgot it was all a transaction. Until that Saturday afternoon. Julian and Sienna had just returned from grocery shopping when his phone rang. It was his cousin, Caleb. Julian, heard you got married. What? No invitation. That's cool, man. Julian frowned. We just went to City Hall. No big ceremony. Can't have that. Tell you what, my treat tonight. Bring the little lady. Let's all grab a drink. How about the Cobalt Room near your place? Say 7 o'clock. Before Julian could refuse, Caleb hung up. What's wrong? Sienna asked. My cousin, Caleb, the one I told you about. Julian ran a frustrated hand through his hair. He wants to treat us to drinks tonight. Sienna nodded knowingly. He's coming to test the waters. You don't have to go. I can make an excuse. Why would I do that? Sienna smiled. This is the perfect opportunity to meet him. See what he's really up to. At 7, they arrived at the Cobalt Room. Caleb was already in a booth, a woman with flawless makeup sitting beside him. Julian, over here. Caleb waved enthusiastically, his eyes immediately landing on Sienna. So this is the new Mrs. Hayes, a real power couple. Julian made the introductions. Caleb, this is my wife, Sienna. Sienna, my cousin, Caleb, and his friend. Vanessa, my girlfriend, Caleb cut in, draping an arm around her shoulders. Sienna smiled politely. It's lovely to meet you both. After they ordered drinks, Caleb launched into a series of seemingly casual but pointed questions. So, an illustrator? That's impressive. How did you two meet again? At a friend's gallery opening, Julian answered. How romantic. Which friend? Maybe I know them. Sienna gently placed her hand on Julian's and took over. It was a private exhibition for the artist Sean M.O. It wasn't really open to the public. Are you interested in contemporary art, Caleb? Thrown off balance, Caleb let out a dry laugh. A little. So, Sienna, where's your family from? You don't sound like you grew up around here. My parents and I lived abroad for most of my childhood. I only moved back a few years ago, she replied smoothly. Didn't Julian mention that? Julian played along, wrapping an arm around her shoulder. I like to keep our private life private. Vanessa chimed in with a smile. I love your dress, Sienna. Who is it by? Sienna glanced down at her dress. Oh, it's not a major label. It's from a small independent designer. If you like it, I can send you her contact info. Julian watched, amazed, as Sienna navigated every question with ease. She not only dodged every trap, but occasionally turned the question back on Caleb, leaving him flustered. After a few rounds of drinks, Caleb seemed a bit drunk, his words becoming more direct. Seriously, Julian, you getting married so suddenly? Didn't your parents find it a little strange? It's not because of, you know. He paused meaningfully. Grandpa's brownstone, is it? Julian's face darkened. What are you trying to say? What could I be saying? Caleb held up his hands. It's just a coincidence, right? The wool gets read, and boom, you're a married man. Suddenly, Sienna let out a small laugh. Everyone turned to look at her. Sorry, she said, taking a sip of her mocktail. I just find it interesting that in your world, Caleb, marriage can be treated so casually. She turned to him, her gaze calm but firm. Julian and I may not have known each other for long, but love isn't measured in time. How long have you and Vanessa been together? Vanessa hesitated. 3 months. So, in your opinion, Caleb, is a 3-month relationship automatically not real? Sienna asked with a gentle smile. Caleb was speechless. He raised his glass to hide his embarrassment. That's not what I meant. My bad. I'll drink to that. Leaving the bar, Julian let out a long breath. That was a close call back there. Thank you. Sienna shook her head. Your cousin is tougher than I expected. He's not going to give up easily. I know. Julian frowned. He just texted me. Said we have to come to the family barbecue next weekend. Then we'll go, Sienna said without hesitation. The more we avoid him, the more suspicious he'll get. Julian looked at her and asked suddenly, why did you take this job? You could have had easier options. Sienna was quiet for a moment, the night wind catching her hair. Your offer was unique. 6 months, a stable place to live, and consistent income. It meant I wouldn't have to take other jobs and could focus on finishing my book series. Julian nodded. The answer was practical, logical. Very Sienna. Back at the apartment, Sienna headed straight for the guest room, but Julian stopped her. Sienna. She turned around. Today. Thank you. Sincerely, he said. Not just for tonight, but for everything you've been doing. She seemed a little surprised, then gave a small smile. You're welcome. It's what you're paying me for. The door clicked shut. Julian stood in the middle of the living room, a strange thought occurring to him. This apartment, once just a place he slept, was starting to feel like a home because of her. It was a dangerous thought, he told himself. This was all fake. In 6 months, Sienna would take her money and leave, and he'd be alone with an inheritance he'd secured with a lie. In the guest room, Sienna opened her small notebook. She wrote, Week 3, subject to showing signs of excessive dependency. Must maintain professional distance. She paused, staring at the words for a long time before closing the book. ####Chapter 3. The family test. The weekend family barbecue was held at a high-end steakhouse downtown. When Julian and Sienna arrived, the private room was already full. His parents, his sister's family, Caleb and Vanessa, and a few distant relatives Julian barely knew were all there. This is a crowd, Julian whispered to Sienna. My cousin is staging an inquisition. Sienna gave his hand a gentle squeeze. Relax. Just follow my lead. The moment they walked in, all eyes turned to them. Julian's mother warmly beckoned them to sit down, placing them directly across from Caleb. Sienna, you look stunning today, Caleb began, his eyes roaming over her. Is that a new dress? Looks expensive. The implication was clear. She was after Julian's money. The table fell silent. But Sienna just smiled. You have a great eye, Caleb. I did just buy it with the advance I received for my latest book project. It's a family gathering, after all. I wanted to dress respectfully for everyone. Julian's mother nodded, pleased. Sienna is so thoughtful. Thwarted, Caleb tried a different angle. I hear the illustrator business isn't very stable. Ever think about getting a real job, Sienna? Julian was about to retort, but Sienna placed a hand on his leg under the table. Thank you for your concern, Caleb. But I recently signed a contract for a 24-book series, so my income is secure for the next 2 years, she said calmly. And I feel very lucky to have turned my passion into a career. Julian has always been incredibly supportive of my work. Right, honey? Julian quickly nodded. Of course. Sienna's art is amazing. I'm so proud of her. Caleb's girlfriend, Vanessa, asked curiously, what kind of books do you illustrate, Sienna? Mostly educational books for children. My current project is about marine biology. Sienna took out her phone and pulled up a few images. These are some of the early sketches. The kids were immediately drawn to the vibrant drawings, and even the adults leaned in for a closer look. These are beautiful, Chloe exclaimed. Sienna, Mia's preschool is looking for someone to teach an art class. Would you be interested? Sienna looked surprised. I'm not sure I'm very good at teaching. Just try it. A one-time workshop, Chloe pleaded. The director is a good friend of mine, and she can't find a suitable teacher. Seeing Sienna's hesitation, Julian cut in. Chloe, Sienna's really busy with her deadline. Don't put her on the spot. It's okay, Sienna said suddenly. I can try. Julian looked at her, shocked. This was completely outside their agreement and didn't seem like something the pragmatic Sienna would agree to. The food arrived, and the conversation shifted to family gossip. Julian began to relax, thinking the worst was over. But when dessert was served, Caleb spoke up again. You know, it's a shame you two were so low-key about getting married. You don't even have any wedding photos. How about I, as the big brother, treat you to a professional photo shoot as a wedding gift? Julian's fork froze midair. This was a landmine they hadn't prepared for. But Sienna just smiled and shook her head. Thank you for the kind offer, Caleb, but we already have plans. Oh, what plans? He pressed. We're planning a trip to take our own wedding photos, she said naturally. We're going to Hokkaido next month for the cherry blossom season. Julian said he wanted to give me a special memory. Julian had no choice but to nod along. That's right. The flights are already booked. His mother looked delighted. Really? You never told us. Sienna gave Julian a slightly shy look. We wanted it to be a surprise. The performance was so seamless that even Julian almost believed they had a trip to Japan planned. On the drive home, Julian was silent. It wasn't until they were back in the apartment that he spoke. What was that about a trip to Hokkaido? Sienna took off her jacket. It was an improvisation. Your cousin was clearly testing us. If we didn't even have wedding photos planned, he'd be even more suspicious. But now we actually have to go to Japan. Julian ran a hand through his hair. Flights, hotels, and these so-called wedding photos. I'll arrange everything, she said calmly. According to the addendum in our contract, any unforeseen expenses will be covered by me. This isn't about the money. Julian paced the living room floor. We have to travel together and take wedding photos? This is way outside the scope of our agreement. Sienna looked at him. Mr. Hayes, you hired me to ensure you inherit that brownstone. If your cousin finds out we're faking this, you not only lose the inheritance, but could also face a lawsuit for fraud. Which of those consequences is worse? Julian was speechless. Sienna sighed, her tone softening. This is just part of the job. You don't need to stress about it. I'll handle the logistics. All you have to do is play your part. Julian felt a sudden sense of exhaustion. The simple lie was snowballing into an elaborate, full-scale production. What about the preschool art class next week? Is that also part of the job? Sienna paused, a rare flicker of hesitation in her eyes. That was my own decision. Your sister was so enthusiastic, I didn't know how to refuse. Her answer surprised him. He had pegged Sienna as someone who never blurred the lines or let emotion dictate her choices. You don't have to do these extra things, he said. I know. She turned and headed for the guest room. Get some rest. That night, Julian had a strange dream. He and Sienna were really in Hokkaido, taking photos under the cherry blossoms, and her smile was completely genuine, not an act at all. When he woke up, he stared at the ceiling for a long time. A notification on his phone showed an unread text sent by Sienna at 2 in the morning. Hokkaido trip is booked. 4 days, 3 nights, leaving the 15th of next month. We'll discuss details tomorrow. Julian put down his phone and rubbed his face. This was all getting way too real. In the following days, Sienna began preparing for their trip. She ordered a wedding dress and a suit online, contacted a local photographer in Japan, and even created a detailed itinerary. Julian watched her handle it all with a mixture of awe and unease. On Thursday afternoon, Sienna went to Mia's preschool to teach the art class. Julian finished work early and, on a whim, drove over. Through the classroom window, he saw Sienna crouched among a group of small children, patiently explaining how to draw a dolphin. She was wearing a simple white t-shirt and jeans, her hair in a ponytail, looking years younger than usual. A little girl tugged on her shirt, and Sienna bent down to listen, then smiled and patted her on the head. The gesture was so tender it made Julian stop at his tracks. He had never seen that expression on her face before. Not the carefully constructed smile of her professional persona, but a genuine, soft, unguarded one. After class, as parents arrived to pick up their children, Mia ran to Julian, ecstatic. "Uncle Julian, look what Aunt Sienna drew for me." She held up a small watercolor painting of a dolphin, with Sienna's elegant signature in the corner. "Sienna is a natural with them," Chloe said, walking up beside him. "The director wants to offer her a permanent part-time position." Julian watched Sienna gathering the art supplies and asked quietly, "Was she happy today?" Chloe gave him a strange look. "Of course she was. It's fun being with kids. Why do you ask such a weird question?" Julian didn't answer. On the way home, Sienna seemed more relaxed than usual, even humming softly to herself. "Today went well?" Julian asked. "Yes, the kids were adorable," she said, looking out the window. "It reminded me of when I was little and first started learning to draw." "You started drawing when you were young?" "Yes. My mother was an art teacher." As soon as she said it, she fell silent, as if she'd revealed too much. Julian sensed a shift. "You rarely talk about your family." Sienna turned her head, her usual composure restored. "Everyone's family story is more or less the same. Nothing special about mine." Another wall. Julian knew better than to push. That night, Julian was working late in his home office. When he came out for water, he saw light peeking from under the guest room door. He hesitated, then knocked softly. "Come in." Sienna was at her desk, her drawing tablet glowing. She was still working. "Still up?" he asked. "Deadline," she said, rubbing her eyes. "I have to get this done before we leave for Hokkaido next week." Looking at her tired profile, Julian suddenly said, "If you don't want to go, we can cancel it. I'll figure something else out for the house." Sienna looked up, surprised. "Why are you saying this all of a sudden?" "It just feels unfair to you. You took this job to have time to work on your books, and now my problems are getting in the way of that." Sienna was quiet for a moment, then she smiled. "Don't worry, I can handle it. Besides, a contract is a contract. I took the money, I'll do the job." Julian nodded and turned to leave. "Julian," Sienna said suddenly. He looked back. "Thank you," she said softly. It was the first time she had called him by his first name, without the formal Mr. Hayes attached to it. Back in his bedroom, sleep wouldn't come. He opened his phone and checked the cherry blossom forecast for Hokkaido. They were blooming early this year. Their trip would coincide perfectly with the peak season. He put his phone down, telling himself it was all just an act. But deep down, a small voice was asking, "Are you sure about that?" Chapter 4, Under the Cherry Blossoms. At New Chitose Airport in Hokkaido, Julian pushed the luggage cart while Sienna walked beside him. It felt entirely too much like a real honeymoon, he thought, especially when an airport employee smiled and wished them a happy wedding, sending a jolt of guilt through him. "We're getting good at this," Sienna whispered, as if reading his mind. "It's a good sign. Our performance is becoming more believable." The traditional Japanese inn they had booked was in Noborabetsu, a beautiful building with a serene rock garden outside their room. The most awkward part was that the inn, assuming they were a real newlywed couple, had prepared only one bedroom with 2 futons laid side by side on the tatami mat floor. I can sleep on the sofa, Julian immediately offered. Sienna shook her head. That's not necessary. We're both adults. We can handle this. Despite her words, a subtle tension filled the air when they lay down side by side that night. The plan for tomorrow is Lake Shikatsu in the morning and Hell Valley in the afternoon, Sienna said, looking at her phone. The photographer is a local. He'll have an assistant and a makeup artist. Julian stared at the ceiling. You've planned everything perfectly. Professionalism, she said, turning off the lamp. Good night. In the dark, Julian could hear her steady breathing. The only other sound was the wind rustling through the bamboo outside. Are you asleep? He asked softly. No. I was just thinking, why do you do this job? Is it really just about the money and the time? Sienna was quiet for a moment. Why do you ask? It's just, you're so capable. You could be successful at anything. She rolled over to face him. In the darkness, her eyes seemed to gleam. I studied finance in college. Got a job at an investment bank after graduation, she said unexpectedly. It was the first time she had ever volunteered information about her past. High salary, prestigious, exactly what everyone considers successful. Julian was surprised. What happened? My father got sick. Stage 4 cancer. Her voice was eerily calm, as if she were telling someone else's story. I took time off to care for him, but my company hinted that frequent absences would hurt my career. During his last days, I was constantly torn between being at the hospital with him and being at work. Julian remained silent, letting her continue. After he passed away, I quit. I started taking odd jobs and stumbled into this industry. She let out a soft breath. This work gives me time to draw, and it taught me something important. Life is too short to waste on things you don't love. So that's why you're so fiercely protective of your art. Yes, drawing was something my father taught me. After he was gone, it became my way of staying connected to him. Julian finally understood the paradox of Sienna. She was both rational and sentimental, pragmatic and idealistic, all shaped by the harsh realities of her life. Thank you for telling me that, he said. Sienna gave a small, wry laugh. That's strange. I've never told a client any of this. Maybe because we're friends now. She didn't answer. After a long pause, she said softly, Get some sleep. We have a long day tomorrow. The next morning, Julian woke to the early light. He turned his head and saw Sienna still asleep, her hair fanned out on the pillow, her face peaceful. In that moment, she was completely unguarded, nothing like the composed professional he was used to. He got up quietly, trying not to wake her, but accidentally kicked the leg of the low table, making a dull thud. Sienna jolted awake, her eyes wide with alarm. Seeing it was just Julian, she relaxed. What time is it? Just past 6. You can sleep a little longer. She shook her head. Once I'm awake, I can't fall back asleep. Breakfast was a traditional Japanese meal provided by the inn, exquisite but small. Julian was still hungry afterward, and Sienna, noticing his expression, couldn't help but smile. We can grab something on the way. They stopped at a convenience store and bought rice balls. As they drove, Sienna nibbled on hers, looking out at the passing scenery. You're actually very observant, Julian said suddenly. She turned to him. What makes you say that? You remembered I don't eat shellfish. You know I eat a big breakfast. And you remembered what my niece and nephew like, he listed. You notice all those little details. Sienna smiled faintly. That's also part of being a professional. The cherry blossoms at Lake Shikatsu were in full bloom, clouds of pink and white set against the brilliant blue of the water. The photographer, a young Japanese man with a small ponytail, spoke fluent English and expertly guided them through various poses. Groom a little closer, hand on the bride's waist. Yes, just like that. Julian's hand rested lightly on Sienna's waist. He could feel the warmth of her body through the fabric of her dress. She looked up at him and smiled, a smile so natural it made him feel dizzy for a second. Perfect. Wonderful. Now, bride, lean against the groom's chest. Sienna leaned into him as instructed. Her hair brushed against his chin, carrying the faint scent of gardenias. Julian instinctively tightened his arm around her, a move that earned praise from the photographer. Yes, so natural. Hold that. During a break, Sienna went for a makeup touch-up. Julian stood by the lake, watching cherry blossom petals drift onto the water surface. You love your wife very much, the photographer said to him in English. Julian was taken aback. Why do you say that? The way you look at her. It is full of love, the photographer said with a smile. I have photographed many newlyweds. I can tell. Julian opened his mouth to explain, but closed it again. He looked over at Sienna, who was tilting her head for the makeup artist. The sunlight cast a golden halo around her. In the afternoon, while they were shooting at Hell Valley, the sky turned overcast and a light drizzle began to fall. The photographer was delighted, saying the blossoms looked even more beautiful in the rain. Sienna, in her thin wedding dress, started to shiver. Without a second thought, Julian took off his suit jacket and draped it over her shoulders. Thank you, she said, looking up at him, tiny raindrops clinging to her eyelashes. The final set of photos was taken under a massive cherry tree. The photographer asked them to stand face to face, their foreheads touching. The pose was incredibly intimate. Julian could feel Sienna's soft breath on his face. In the gray light, her hazel eyes seemed to hold the reflection of the entire lake. Sienna. He whispered her name without thinking. She murmured in response. He suddenly had nothing to say. In that single, silent moment, he realized with absolute clarity that his feelings for Sienna had grown far beyond the boundaries of their contract. The ride back to the inn was quiet. Dinner was an elaborate multi-course meal, each dish a work of art, but Julian barely tasted it. Tomorrow is a free day. Is there anywhere you'd like to go? Sienna asked. You decide, he said. You know this area better. She nodded. Let's go to Autru then. I've heard the glasswork there is beautiful. That night, lying side by side on their futons, Julian couldn't sleep. Sienna, are you awake? Yes. I was thinking, after 6 months, when the contract ends, what happens to us? Sienna was silent for a long moment. According to the contract, I will leave, and we will have no further contact. Does it have to be that way? She rolled over to face him in the dark. Julian, you know our relationship is built on a contract. If we start confusing the act with reality, it won't end well for either of us. But what if? What if I don't want it to end? The words hung in the silent room. Sienna didn't answer immediately, but he felt her breath catch. You're just caught up in a moment, she finally said, her voice soft. Once we're back in our normal lives, this feeling will fade. How can you be so sure? Because I've been through this before, she said, a trace of bitterness in her voice. A previous client said something similar. It turned out he was in love with the role I was playing, not the real me. Julian wanted to argue, but she had already turned her back to him, ending the conversation. Get some sleep. We have to go to Autru tomorrow. The next day, by the Autru Canal, Sienna acted like a genuine tourist, excitedly exploring the glass workshops. She lingered for a long time in front of a shop that made delicate glass wind chimes. They're so beautiful, she said softly. If you like one, you should get it, Julian said. She shook her head. I wouldn't have anywhere to hang it. I'm always moving. Her words were a stark reminder that Sienna's life was transient, moving from one contract to the next, with no place to call her own. While resting at a coffee shop, Julian asked casually, what do you plan to do after our contract is over? Sienna stirred her coffee. Probably take on a new assignment, or focus on finishing my book series. Have you ever thought about settling down? She looked up at him. Settling down isn't for me. Why not? It's like caging a wild animal. No matter how gilded the cage, it's still a cage, she said, putting down her spoon. I'm used to being on my own, coming and going as I please, with no strings attached. Julian looked at her and suddenly understood. It wasn't that Sienna didn't want a relationship. It was that she was afraid of one. Afraid of being tied down, afraid of getting hurt, afraid of losing someone important again. On the flight back, Sienna stared out the window at the clouds. Julian couldn't help but ask, what are you thinking about? She turned to him with a faint smile. I'm thinking these photos should be more than enough to convince your cousin. Another deflection. Julian sighed and didn't push it. They landed late at night. As they walked to the parking garage, the cool night air hit them. Sienna, wearing only a thin blouse, wrapped her arms around herself. Julian instinctively took off his jacket and put it over her shoulders. This time, she didn't thank him right away. She just pulled the collar tighter. Julian, she said suddenly, don't be too nice to me. Why? Because I might start to believe it's real, she whispered, then quickened her pace, leaving him standing there, stunned. In that moment, Julian knew with certainty that something had changed. This wasn't an act, not a contract. This was real, but he had no idea if Sienna felt the same way. Chapter 5. The unraveling. After they returned from Hokkaido, the atmosphere in the apartment grew tense. Sienna seemed to be deliberately keeping her distance, spending most of her time working in the guest room and avoiding him outside of necessary conversations. Julian didn't push it. He needed time to figure out his own feelings. Was this just a classic case of Stockholm Syndrome, a byproduct of playing house for so long? Or is it something real? Leo noticed Julian's distraction immediately. "Dude, what is going on with you? Your bug rate has gone up 30% this week," Leo said, rapping his knuckles on Julian's desk. "You come back from your fake honeymoon completely out of it. Did you actually fall for your contract wife?" Julian gave a wry smile. "Is it that obvious?" Leo's eyes widened. "Whoa, are you serious? Did you forget what you said from the beginning? It's just a business deal. 6 months, and we go our separate ways." "People change," Julian said, rubbing his temples. "And Sienna, she's not who I thought she was." "How so?" Julian thought for a moment. "On the surface, she's all logic and professionalism. But underneath, she's incredibly thoughtful. She remembers everyone's preferences. She agreed to teach that art class just so she wouldn't disappoint my sister. She even makes sure I have breakfast when she's been up all night on a deadline." Stop. Leo held up a hand. "You have all the symptoms of a man in love. Let me remind you, she's a professional getting paid to do a job. Don't get your hopes up." "I know," Julian sighed. But he couldn't stop thinking about the look in her eyes when she talked about her father, or the warmth of her body when she leaned against him under the cherry trees. Could that all have been just an act? The weekend marked the anniversary of his grandfather's death, and the whole family was going to the cemetery. It was a major family event, which meant Caleb would be there, ready for another round of interrogation. Before they left, Sienna meticulously checked their outfits. She wore a tasteful black dress, her makeup understated and appropriate for the occasion. "Remember, say as little as possible. Just observe," she instructed him. "Your cousin will definitely look for an opening to test us. Follow my lead." Julian nodded, then couldn't help but ask, "Are you okay? You seem to have been avoiding me this week." Her hands stilled on the collar of her dress. "I haven't been avoiding you. I've just been focused on work. The deadline for my new book is approaching." Another clinical, professional answer. Julian felt a pang of disappointment, but let it go. At the cemetery, the Hayes family gathered. Caleb was already there, standing before their grandfather's grave with a solemn expression. After the memorial, everyone moved to a nearby restaurant. As expected, Caleb started his probing right away. "So, Julian, Sienna, I hear you just got back from Hokkaido. What made you decide to take a trip now?" Sienna answered with a calm smile. "It was a rare break in my work schedule, and Julian had just wrapped up a major project. We wanted to see the cherry blossoms before the season ended." "How romantic," Vanessa, Caleb's girlfriend, said wistfully. "The pictures must be beautiful." Sienna took out her phone and showed them a few photos from Lake Shikatsu. In the pictures, she and Julian were smiling at each other, their gazes intertwined. Anyone would assume they were a couple deeply in love. "These are lovely," Julian's mother said, beaming. "Sienna, send me a few. I want to frame them for the living room." Caleb studied the photos intently, then asked, "Who took these for you?" "A local photographer," Sienna replied smoothly. "I can recommend him if you'd like." Caleb narrowed his eyes. "No, that's okay. I was just curious why every photo only has the two of you in it. Usually, wedding photos have different angles, solo shots, close-ups." The table fell silent. Julian felt a bead of sweat trickle down his back. Caleb's attention to detail was unnerving. But Sienna didn't flinch. She even laughed lightly. "You're very observant, Caleb. We did take a lot of different shots, but these were my favorites. Julian, why don't you show them the solo shots you took in the traditional kimono?" Julian froze. He hadn't taken any solo shots in a kimono. With everyone staring at him, he had no choice but to pull out his phone and pretend to scroll through his photos. Just as panic set in, Sienna casually took his phone from him. "Oh wait, I remember. I have them on my phone. You sent them to me right after the shoot. Said you wanted to surprise me." She expertly navigated her own phone and produced a series of photos of Julian, dressed in a kimono, smiling under a cherry tree. The background was a perfect match for their location in Hokkaido. There were no visible flaws. Julian was stunned. He had no memory of taking those pictures. These turned out great, he managed to say. Under the table, Sienna gave his hand a reassuring squeeze. Caleb, finally out of ammunition, grumbled and went back to his food. After the meal, Julian pulled Sienna aside. Where did those photos come from? I know for a fact I never took those. Sienna gave him a mysterious smile. Photoshop is a wonderful thing. I found some old photos of you on your social media and composited them onto the Hokkaido backgrounds. Just in case. Looks like it came in handy. Julian was speechless. Sienna's foresight was both impressive and unsettling. On the drive home, Julian was quiet. It wasn't until they were inside the apartment that he spoke. Sienna, we need to talk. She put down her bag and sighed. If this is about our feelings, I don't think there's any point. Why not? Are you afraid to even hear what I have to say? Sienna turned to face him. Julian, I took this job because it met my needs, a stable income, and a set schedule. I don't want to complicate my work with messy emotions. But what if it's not just work anymore? Julian took a step closer. What if my feelings for you are real? Her composure wavered for a split second, then her professional mask was back in place. You're confusing the performance with reality. It's a common psychological response. Long-term role-playing can create a false sense of emotional dependency. It's temporary. How can you be so sure? Julian grabbed her shoulders gently. Look me in the eye and tell me you feel absolutely nothing for me. She met his gaze, her hazel eyes swirling with a complex mix of emotions. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Just then, the doorbell rang. They both froze. Who could be this late? Julian walked to the door and looked through the peephole. His blood ran cold. What is it? Sienna asked. Julian turned around slowly, his face pale. It's Caleb, and he's not alone. Who's with him? Ms. Wallace, the director from the agency. Sienna's face paled too. Ms. Wallace was the only other person who knew the truth about their contract. The doorbell rang again, followed by Caleb's voice. Julian, open up. I know you're in there. Julian and Sienna exchanged a look of pure dread. The worst-case scenario had just arrived at their door. Hashtag Chapter 6. The departure. Julian took a deep breath and opened the door. Caleb stood there, a triumphant smirk on his face. Beside him, Ms. Wallace, the agency director, stared at the floor, refusing to meet their eyes. Sorry to drop by so late, Sienna, Caleb said, his use of her name dripping with sarcasm. Aren't you going to invite us in? Julian blocked the doorway. Whatever you have to say, you can say it here. Fine by me. Caleb pulled a file from his jacket pocket. I'll get straight to the point. Ms. Wallace here has told me everything. You and this mess. Miller, he said, emphasizing her name, signed a contract marriage agreement for 6 months, with the explicit purpose of defrauding our family to secure Grandpa's inheritance. Julian's hands clenched into fists. You're out of your mind. Still want to deny it? Caleb waved the file. I have a copy of the contract right here, and the wire transfer records, showing you paid the agency $100,000, with $75,000 of that going directly to Ms. Miller as her fee. Sienna stepped forward, her voice calm. Ms. Wallace, is this true? The woman finally looked up, her eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry, Sienna. Mr. Hayes. He threatened to report our agency for operating in a legal gray area. I had no choice. Caleb's smirk widened. So, here are your options. 1. I take this evidence to the family lawyers. You'll not only lose the brownstone, but you'll also face criminal fraud charges. Or 2. You voluntarily renounce your claim to the inheritance, and I'll consider letting this go. Julian was shaking with rage. You're a bastard. All's fair in love and real estate. Dear cousin, Caleb said with a grin. You have 3 days to decide. Don't take any longer. After they left, Julian slammed the door and punched the wall. Calm down, Sienna said softly. How can I calm down? It's over. We've lost the house, and now I'm going to be sued. Julian buried his head in his hands. I should have known Caleb would stoop this low. Sienna was silent for a moment, then said, Not necessarily. Julian looked up. What do you mean? Ms. Wallace only provided the contract and the wire transfers. That's not enough to prove we faked our marriage, she reasoned, her mind already working. Our marriage license is legal. The fact that we live together is a fact. As long as we don't admit anything, it's his word against ours. Julian stared at her. You mean, we keep up the act? It's the only option we have right now, she nodded. Caleb thinks he has us cornered, so he'll let his guard down. We can use that time to find evidence that he blackmailed Ms. Wallace. Turn the tables on him. But that's so risky. If we fail. If you give up now, you've already failed, she said, looking him straight in the eye. Are you willing to let him win? Julian looked at Sienna and realized that in a true crisis, she was infinitely calmer and stronger than he was. Why are you still helping me? You could take the money you've already earned and walk away from this mess. Sienna turned away, her voice quiet. Because I don't like to lose, especially not to someone like Caleb. The answer was classic Sienna, but Julian suspected there was more to it than that. Over the next 2 days, they launched a counteroffensive. Sienna contacted a friend who worked as a private investigator to look into Caleb's business dealings. Meanwhile, Julian played the part of the defeated cousin, calling Caleb to beg for mercy while secretly recording the call. Caleb, we're family. Do you really have to do this? Julian pleaded, his voice weak. Caleb took the bait. A little late for begging, isn't it? I'm telling you, that brownstone is mine. The land alone is worth a fortune. He named a staggering figure. You were planning to develop it all along. Of course. Grandpa was an old fool, sitting on prime real estate like that. It's a waste, Caleb scoffed. Don't worry. When the condos are finished, I'll save a studio apartment for you. After the call, Julian saved the recording and looked at Sienna. I got it. She nodded. I have something too. Your cousin's company is in financial trouble. He's desperate to get his hands on that land to secure a new line of credit. So that's why he's so desperate. One more thing, Sienna said with a mysterious smile. His girlfriend, Vanessa, doesn't seem to be fully on board with his methods. On the third night, Caleb called, right on schedule. So what's it going to be? Julian put the phone on speaker. We've decided. We're not giving up our claim to the inheritance. There was a moment of silence, then Caleb's cold laugh. Looks like you two want to do this the hard way. Fine. I'm sending the evidence to the lawyers tomorrow morning. Go ahead, Sienna said suddenly. But before you do, you might want to listen to this. She played the recording of their phone call, highlighting the part where Caleb admitted his plan to demolish the brownstone for profit. Caleb's voice turned frantic. You recorded me. That's not all, Sienna continued. We also know about your company's financial troubles and how desperately you need this property deal to go through. If that information were to leak to your investors, do you think they'd stick around? A long, heavy silence filled the line. Julian could almost picture Caleb's face turning purple with rage. What do you want? He finally snarled. It's simple, Julian said. You drop this, and we won't release any of this information. Done. When the call ended, Julian exhaled, feeling completely drained. Did we win? He asked, hardly daring to believe it. Sienna smiled and nodded. We won. Overcome with emotion, Julian pulled Sienna into a fierce hug. Thank you, Sienna. I don't know what I would have done without you. The hug was so sudden that Sienna froze, not pushing him away. Her hair brushed against his cheek, the familiar scent of gardenias filling his senses. Julian realized what he was doing and quickly let go. Sorry, I just got carried away. It's okay, Sienna said, looking down, her voice barely a whisper. It's worth celebrating. The mood in the room shifted. Julian noticed the tips of her ears were pink, and his own heart began to race. Sienna. Just then, her phone rang. She answered it with a visible sense of relief. Hello. Yes. Okay, I'll check my email right now. She hung up, her professional mask firmly back in place. My editor sent over some revisions for the new book. I need to take care of them. Watching her retreat to the guest room, Julian sighed. Every time he tried to get close, she found a way to escape. But this time, he wasn't going to give up. The next day, Julian got a call from the family lawyer. Caleb had officially withdrawn his contest to the will. The battle was finally over. He immediately wanted to share the good news with Sienna, but her door was closed. He knocked, but there was no answer. He tried calling her cell. It went straight to voicemail. A terrible feeling washed over him. He pushed open the guest room door. The room was unnervingly neat. Her suitcase was gone. Her art supplies and laptop had vanished. On the nightstand was a letter and an envelope. With trembling hands, Julian picked up the letter. It was her handwriting, elegant and precise. Julian, by now, the matter of the brownstone should be resolved. Although our contract has not officially ended, my work here is done. The remainder of my fee has been returned to your account. I'm glad I could help you protect something so important to you. I hope you cherish the house and your family. Don't look for me. Sienna. Inside the envelope was the original cashier's check for $75,000. On the back, she had written services rendered in full. Julian stood frozen in the empty room, unable to believe she was gone. He tried her number again and again. It was disconnected. He called the agency, only to find out that Ms. Wallace had resigned and the business was shutting down. Sienna Miller had vanished from his life as completely as if she had never existed at all. Chapter 7. The search. A week had passed since Sienna left. Julian sat in the silent apartment, where every corner seemed to hold a trace of her. The mug she used for her morning coffee was still in the kitchen cabinet. The corner of the living room, where she sometimes sketched, was empty. The faint scent of gardenias still lingered in the guest bathroom. He had tried every possible way to find her, but it was a dead end. Sienna had severed all ties, erasing herself from his life. The inheritance paperwork for the brownstone was complete. Julian stood inside the house, surrounded by the memories of his childhood, but felt no joy. The victory was hollow without her. So she just left? Leo asked, incredulous. And returned all the money? Julian nodded, his eyes vacant. She left a note saying the job was done, and then disappeared. That's one strange woman. Goes through all that trouble to help you, and then wants nothing for it, Leo said, shaking his head. But hey, you got what you wanted, right? Julian didn't answer. He had saved the house, but he had lost something far more valuable. Back at the studio, he tried to lose himself in work, but he couldn't focus. Sienna's face kept appearing on his screen. Her smile, her focused expression, the feeling of her leaning against him in Hokkaido. One evening, while cleaning his home office, he stumbled upon a sketchbook Sienna had left behind. He hesitated for a moment, then opened it. The first few pages were filled with illustrations and composition studies. But as he flipped further, he froze. The rest of the book was filled with portraits of him, frowning in concentration at his computer, his cheeks puffed out as he ate, his face peaceful in sleep. Each sketch was rendered with incredible detail and emotion. This wasn't the work of a detached observer. This was drawn by someone who had studied him with profound understanding and affection. On the very last page, in small, neat handwriting, was a single sentence. If only this were real. Julian traced the words with his finger, his heart pounding. She had felt something for him. The next day, Julian went to Mia's preschool, where Chloe was volunteering. Hey, where's Sienna? I haven't seen her in a while, Chloe asked. Julian sidestepped the question. Hey, when she taught that art class, did she happen to leave any contact info? Like a number for the parents? Chloe thought for a moment. I don't think so, but she did talk to the director about a long-term position. The director might have her information. Julian immediately found the director, but the number Sienna had left was no longer in service. However, the director added, she was very interested in our school's art education philosophy. She asked a lot of questions and said she wanted to study early childhood art education more formally someday. That single sentence sparked a glimmer of hope. It was a clue. Over the next few weeks, Julian dedicated every spare moment to finding her. He contacted everyone he could think of, visited places she might go, but came up empty every time. Just as he was about to give up, Leo came to him with a piece of news. I remember you said Sienna's father was an art teacher, right? Julian's head snapped up. Yes. Well, I have a friend who works at the School of Visual Arts. He said a new visiting scholar just started. Her name is Dr. Shun, and her research focus is on early childhood art education. Julian practically leaped out of his chair. Which one? Give me the address. Hold on, I'm not done. Leo held him back. The thing is, this Dr. Shun doesn't look like the woman you described. My friend sent me a picture. Look, the photo showed a woman in her 40s with glasses and an academic air. It clearly wasn't Sienna. Julian sank back into his chair, deflated. But, Leo said, hesitating. My friend did say that this professor has a daughter. Or had a daughter. She used to come to the university sometimes. She was an artist too. Hope surged back through Julian. Can you ask him what her daughter's name was? Leo made the call. When he hung up, he looked at Julian with pity. The professor's daughter was named Sienna Shun, but she passed away 3 years ago. The news hit Julian like a physical blow. That's impossible. Sienna is... My friend is positive. Professor Shin's daughter, Sienna, died in a car accident 3 years ago. She was only 24. Julian felt the room spin. If Sienna wasn't even her real name, what part of their time together had been real? That night, he lay awake, his mind racing. He pulled out the sketchbook and looked at the portraits again, at the final sentence. If only this were real. He now understood the deep well of sadness behind those words. Suddenly, he noticed a faint impression on the inside back cover of the sketchbook. Holding it up to the light, he could just make out the embossed words, Willow Creek Studio. He immediately searched the name online. It was a small illustration studio in Philadelphia, specializing in custom art and design projects. The next morning, Julian was in his car, driving to Philly. Willow Creek Studio was located in a trendy arts district, a small but charming space. A young woman at the front desk smiled at him. Hi, can I help you? I'm looking for Sienna, Julian said directly. The woman's expression immediately became guarded. May I ask who's calling? My name is Julian Hayes. I'm a friend of hers. She looked him over. One moment, please. She made a quick call, speaking in hushed tones. A minute later, a woman in her 50s emerged from the back. I'm Lisa, the studio manager. Can I help you with something, Mr. Hayes? Julian took a deep breath. I just want to see her. There are some things I need to say to her in person. Lisa studied him. Sienna's not here right now. And she made it very clear she doesn't want to see anyone, especially not someone with your last name. Her words confirmed it. Sienna was connected to this place. Is she okay? Julian asked, his voice strained. She's fine. She's busy with a few big projects, Lisa said, her tone softening slightly. Mr. Hayes, Sienna is a good person who has been through a lot. If you really care about her, you'll respect her decision and stop looking for her. A sharp pain went through Julian's chest. I just need to know one thing. Was any of it real? Or was it all just an act? Lisa sighed. Only Sienna can answer that. But I can tell you this. What she did for you went far beyond the scope of any job. That gave him a sliver of hope. Please, just tell me where she is. Give me a way to contact her. I promise, if she tells me to go away, I'll never bother her again. Lisa hesitated for a long time, then shook her head. I'm sorry. I gave her my word. Defeated, Julian left the studio. He sat in his car, unable to start the engine. Was this it? Was he supposed to just give up? Just then his phone rang. It was an unknown number. Hello. There was a brief silence on the other end, then a voice he knew better than his own. Julian, why did you come here? It was Sienna. ####Chapter 8. The reunion. Sienna? Where are you? Julian asked, his voice urgent. That's not important, she said, her tone so calm it was unnerving. I need you to stop looking for me. Don't come here again. Why? At least give me a chance to explain. Explain what? She asked softly. Explain how you found out I was using a false identity. How you tracked me to Willow Creek Studio. Julian was stunned. You? How did you know? Lisa just called me, Sienna sighed. Julian, our contract is over. Why can't you just let it go? Because my feelings for you are real. Julian almost shouted into the phone. Sienna, I don't care who you are or what your name is. I fell for you. The person, not the identity. The line went silent. Julian could hear the faint sound of her breathing. I found a sketchbook you left behind, he continued, his voice softening. Those drawings, and that sentence you wrote. If it was all an act, why did you draw those pictures? Why did you write that? Still, she said nothing. Sienna, please. Just give me one chance to talk to you in person. If you still want me to leave after that, I promise I will never bother you again. After a long, tense silence, she finally spoke. Tomorrow afternoon, 3 o'clock, the coffee shop near the studio, the Daily Grind. Okay, I'll be there. He hung up, his body slumping with relief. He had one more chance. The next day, Julian arrived at the coffee shop half an hour early. He chose a table by the window and waited, his nerves shot. At 3 o'clock sharp, Sienna walked in. She looked thinner, and she had cut her hair short, giving her a sharper, more serious look. She was wearing a simple white shirt and jeans. "Hello, Julian," she said, sitting across from him and ordering a black coffee. "Hi," he said, his mind racing with a million things to say. Sienna stirred her coffee, breaking the silence first. "What do you want to know?" "Everything," he said. "Your real story. Why you used a fake name. Why you do what you do. Everything." She looked up, her gaze complicated. "And what good will knowing all that do for you?" "Because I care about you, Sienna, no matter what your real name is." She let out a small, bitter laugh. "My real name is Anna. Anna Miller. Sienna was my best friend." She paused, taking a sip of coffee. "My father was an art teacher who passed away when I was in high school. My mother remarried, and I was mostly on my own after that. I studied finance, worked at an investment bank. All of that was true. Then why? Why the fake identity?" She looked down at her cup. 3 years ago, my best friend, the real Sienna, Professor Shin's daughter, died in a car accident. We grew up together, learned to draw together. We even looked a little alike. After she died, her mother was devastated, her health failed. When I went to visit her, she was so lost in her grief that she mistook me for her daughter. Julian stared at her, horrified. In that moment, I didn't know how to correct her. Anna's voice trembled. So I just went with it. I started visiting her, pretending to be her daughter, just to give her some comfort. I started using her name in certain situations to keep the story straight. So Willow Creek Studio. Professor Shun started it. After she retired, I took over managing it, Anna confirmed. That's my real job. The acting was just a side hustle. The pieces were finally clicking into place. So why did you take my contract? You already had a stable income. Anna was quiet for a moment. Because I needed to escape. Escape from what? Professor Shun was getting worse. She started to believe I really was her daughter. I was so conflicted. I wanted to be there for her, but I was terrified of losing myself completely in that lie. Her grip on her coffee cup tightened. Your offer came at the perfect time. 6 months, a new city, a new identity. It was a chance to step away and figure things out. Julian looked at the pain in her eyes, and his heart ached for her. Have you figured it out? She shook her head. Not yet, but I know I can't keep running. Anna. Julian reached across the table and gently covered her hand with his. Let me help you face it. Let me be there with you. She looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Why? Why are you being so good to me? It was all just a business transaction. It started that way, but it didn't end that way, Julian said firmly. I love you, Anna. Not the contract wife, not the persona. I love the real you. A tear finally escaped and rolled down her cheek. But I don't even know who the real me is anymore. I'm Anna, but I'm also Sienna. How can you love someone so broken? You are you, Julian said, his grip tightening on her hand. And I love all of it. She broke down then, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. Julian moved to the seat beside her and wrapped an arm around her. Anna, stay. Give me a chance. Give yourself a chance. She leaned against his shoulder and cried for a long time. Finally, she looked up and wiped her eyes. I need time, Julian. I'm not saying no, but I need to sort out my life. I need to figure out who I am and what I want. He nodded. Understand. I'll wait, however long it takes. She looked at him and managed a small smile. You're the most stubborn person I've ever met. Only when it comes to you. When they left the coffee shop, Anna promised to stay in touch but asked for space. Julian respected her decision, but this time he was sure their story wasn't over. On the drive home, he received a text from her. Thank you for understanding. P.S. The drawings were real. Julian smiled. There was still hope. #### Chapter 9. The promised 2 months passed. Julian kept his promise. He didn't call or visit, but he sent an email every week telling her about his life. The renovation progress on the brownstone, a new project at a studio, even just small, everyday things. Anna rarely replied, but every once in a while, she would send a picture of a new illustration or a simple, one-line greeting. Their quiet, distant correspondence became the anchor of Julian's week. One afternoon, Julian was at the brownstone overseeing the contractors when he got a call from an unknown number. Is this Julian Hayes? A woman's voice asked. Yes, who is this? It's Lisa, from Willow Creek Studio. Anna. She's been admitted to the hospital. Julian's heart stopped. What happened? Is she okay? Professor Shen passed away. Anna took it very hard. She hasn't eaten in 2 days, and she collapsed at the studio this morning, Lisa said, her voice filled with worry. She needs someone with her, but she doesn't have much family. Which hospital? I'm on my way. Julian drove to Philadelphia in a blur. He found her in a small room, lying pale against the white sheets, and 4 drip in her arm. Her eyes were closed, her eyelashes still damp with tears. Lisa was standing by the bed. She nodded at Julian when he entered. She just fell asleep, she whispered. The doctor said it's exhaustion and dehydration, brought on by extreme grief. She just needs to rest. Julian sat by the bed and gently took Anna's hand. How did this happen? Professor Shen passed in her sleep 2 nights ago, Lisa sighed. Anna was with her. She handled everything, planned the funeral as her daughter. But after it was over, she just fell apart. Julian's heart ached looking at Anna's gaunt face. Thank you for calling me. After Lisa left, Julian sat by her bedside for hours. As evening fell, Anna's eyes fluttered open. She seemed surprised to see him. What are you doing here? Lisa called me, he said softly. How are you feeling? Anna's eyes immediately filled with tears. She's gone, Julian. The last person who felt like family to me is gone. Julian leaned over and pulled her into a hug. You have me, Anna. You still have me. She sobbed into his shoulder, a raw, broken sound that seemed to carry all the pain she had been holding inside. Julian held her, stroking her back, letting her tears soak his shirt. After a long time, she grew quiet. Julian helped her drink some water and coaxed her into eating a little soup. The doctor says you need a rest. When you're discharged, will you come home with me? He asked gently. Anna shook her head. I can't keep depending on you. Anna, he said, taking her hand. It's not weakness to lean on someone who loves you. Please, let me take care of you. She looked into his sincere eyes and finally nodded. After she was discharged, Julian brought Anna back to his apartment. He took a week off from work to look after her. At first, she was withdrawn, often staring out the window for hours at a time. Julian gave her space, silently staying by her side, making sure she ate and rested. One night, a noise from the living room woke him. He found Anna sitting on the sofa, her old sketchbook open on her lap. I couldn't sleep, she whispered. He sat down next to her. Want to talk? She was quiet for a moment. Professor Shin told me something before she passed. What was it? She told me she knew. Anna said, her voice thick with emotion. She knew I wasn't her daughter. She said she knew from the very first day, but she never said anything because having me there brought her peace. She thanked me for all these years and told me it was time for me to let go of the burden and live my own life. Julian wrapped an arm around her shoulders. She loved you, even knowing you weren't her biological daughter. She said that names and identities don't matter. What matters is the connection between 2 hearts. Anna leaned her head on his shoulder. You were right, Julian. I am who I am, no matter what name I use. You finally see it, Julian said with a soft smile. Anna looked up at him. I've been thinking a lot these past 2 months. Every time I got one of your emails, I wanted to write back, but I didn't know what to say. I was so afraid of depending on you, so afraid of losing someone important again. And now I know that when you're afraid of losing someone, it means you've already found something worth holding on to, she said softly. Julian, I love you too. No act, no contract. It's real. He had waited so long to hear those words. He cupped her face in his hands and gently kissed her. The kiss was tender and deep, filled with love and promises. Marry me, Anna, he whispered against her forehead. For real this time. She smiled through her tears. Is that a proposal? Yes. I'll do a proper one later, with a ring and flowers, but I mean it with all my heart. She nodded. Okay. Yes. They held each other tightly in the quiet living room. 2 people who had found their way back to each other. This time, there was no contract, no performance, only the truth. Hashtag chapter 10. The wedding 1 year later, in the garden of the Brooklyn brownstone. Julian stood under a newly planted cherry tree, nervously adjusting his bow tie. Leo stood beside him, grinning. Getting nervous? It's your second wedding. You should be a pro by now. This one's different, Julian shot back. This one's real. Today was his and Anna's real wedding. No contracts, no acting, just two people in love, choosing to spend their lives together. In the past year, Anna had blossomed. She continued to run Willow Creek Studio, her children's books gaining critical acclaim. And with Julian's encouragement, she had gotten her teaching certificate and now taught a weekly art class for underprivileged kids at a local community center. She had finally shed the weight of her assumed identity and embraced who she truly was. Ready? Chloe asked, poking her head out. The bride is ready, and she looks absolutely breathtaking. Julian took a deep breath and nodded. The ceremony was small and intimate, held in the brownstone's newly restored garden. When Anna appeared at the end of the aisle in a simple, elegant white dress, Julian forgot how to breathe. She smiled as she walked toward him, her eyes shining with love and happiness. "You look beautiful," Julian whispered as he took her hand. "You clean up nicely yourself," she whispered back, a playful glint in her eye. The ceremony was simple, their vows heartfelt and true. When Julian slid the ring onto Anna's finger, the small crowd of friends and family erupted in applause. Caleb was even there with a generous wedding gift. Time had mellowed him, and his relationship with Julian had slowly begun to mend. He was with a new girlfriend now, someone he seemed to genuinely love, and perhaps he finally understood. "Congratulations," Caleb said sincerely. "Anna's a good one. Take care of her." "I will," Julian nodded. After the ceremony, as guests mingled inside, Julian and Anna snuck out to the back garden and sat on the old tire swing. "Tired?" Julian asked, gently pushing the swing. Anna leaned her head on his shoulder. "A little, but so happy." The stars were bright in the city sky. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, sending a few cherry blossoms fluttering down around them. "Remember the cherry tree in Hokkaido a year ago?" Julian asked softly. "Anna it." "Of course. I was trying so hard to convince myself it was just a job. And now I know that there are some feelings that not even the best actor in the world can fake," she said, tilting her head to kiss his cheek. "Like the way I love you, Julian. Then, now, and always." He pulled her closer, his heart full of gratitude. He was grateful for that crazy, impulsive decision, for the absurd contract that had led him to the love of his life. "I have a gift for you," Julian said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Anna opened it. Inside was a single, ornate key. "What's this?" "The key to the brownstone," he said, smiling. "I had the deed put in both of our names. This is our home now, a place for us and for the sound of our children's laughter one day." Anna's eyes welled up. "Thank you, Julian." "No," he said, his voice serious. "Thank you. Thank you for walking into my life and showing me what real love is." They smiled at each other and shared a gentle kiss under the cherry tree. The moonlight cast their shadows on the ground, two figures intertwined, a perfect start to their long and happy life together. What began with a contract had ended in a promise. Their story was just beginning.